Clearly, I am no authority on shooting straight. I am neither an authority on shooting, nor am I an authority, frankly, on straight. But whether or not the Afghan army can shoot straight was one of the single most interesting and unexpected things I came up against on my trip to Afghanistan. We are building a $10 billion a year army and police force in a country with a $14 billion a year economy. Now, that's hard enough to swallow. It is even harder to swallow when you realize how badly we were at building that army and police force for so long. So I'm here with Lieutenant Jeff Corshane. He's originally from Minnesota, and he's been here since January. It's July now. And he's involved in direct training of Afghan National Army recruits. It's the basic warrior training. It takes about 8 weeks. Is that right, Lieutenant?
Yes.
Okay, and over the course of that 8 weeks, obviously where we're at right now is marksmanship training. Where are you trying to take them toward in terms of what they're trying to accomplish with marksmanship? Where should they be at the end of that 8 weeks?
At the end of the 8 weeks, we want them to be able to qualify at about a 98% rate. That's what we're achieving right now. So qualify on their target 98% of the personnel.
These are M16 rifles they're using?
Yes, they are.
Okay. So I understand that you've had some remarkable progress in the marksmanship rates. When you arrived here, the qualifying rate for a group of 1,400 Afghans going through here in an 8-week course was 30 to 35%. Now, that was January. Now in July, it's 95%?
Yes.
How do you get improvement that dramatic?
One of the things that we did is we introduced more rigorous basic rifle marksmanship instruction. So even before they go onto the range, we ensure that they know everything about their weapon, how to pull the trigger, how to properly aim, and then right here we have some classes. You can see an example of that. There's 2 days of this type of instruction where it's just hands on the weapon before they even come out here.
In terms of what we can see here, these are diagrams of the weapons, learning about the weapons. This is about if your target looks like this, you need to be adjusting your technique in a specific way? Okay.
Yes, so we have how to load the weapon. This second one here is what different shot groups would look like and what they'll go through and explain. This is what you're doing wrong for each shot group. So that top left one would be that they have poor breathing and poor sight picture. The top right one there would be they just have poor breathing. That's why the shot groups are close, but they're all over the place. And they just go through each one. They can show what it should look like if you're using proper rifle.
And how to diagnose what's wrong with your technique based on what's happening with your target.
Mm-hmm.
I see. In terms of these young men here who are turning out to join the ANA, did they have any experience with weapons before they get here, or are they generally learning about rifles for the first time?
They don't have experience with the M16. Yeah. Many of them have experience with the AK-47, but it's a very different weapon, and so we do have to basically teach them from the beginning about the M16 rifle.
Can I ask you a question? How much has the training changed before 2009? How much has it changed between the way it was before and now?
The first thing, that we have totally changed the system of Warsaw to the NATO.
Yes.
Now we are training with a new and NATO equipment.
What I was asking about there, all I was asking about was how training had changed over time. It was fascinating to me that what the Afghan general I was asking immediately brought up when I asked him that, General Pachani there, what he brought up is that the training changed from Warsaw Pact weapons, meaning Russian weapons, meaning AK-47s, to NATO weapons, M16s. I wasn't asking him about weapons. I was asking him about training broadly. That's the issue he raised, Afghans using American guns. That's a huge deal on the ground.
They train on the M16 here.
On the M16, okay.
And then when they get to their corps, I don't think all the corps are completely filled yet, but they're in transition to receive U.S., what we call NATO weapons. So those are U.S. M16s or NATO M16s and commiserate light machine guns and medium machine guns.
Okay.
Yes.
So the emphasis on accuracy as opposed to spraying the target area.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Accuracy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that's
minimizing civilian casualties and all of that sort of stuff.
It's a microcosm because it's a single issue among a million different issues, but it's actually it says quite a lot. I mean, with the AK, you presumably not have to maintain it as well. You wouldn't need the sort of training to maintain that weapon, but you'd never be able to count on the sort of accuracy you can count on from these other NATO weapons. And it actually sort of speaks to the larger issue here about, what you need if you can count on having logistical support.
There's a certain degree of, I think there's a certain degree of pride for the Afghans too in having, a proper modern NATO weapon.
Yeah.
It looks the part. They feel different. They're not just like the fellow on the street with his AK-47.
Brigadier David Patterson of NATO there is in charge of training the Afghan army for NATO. I'm not sure about whether there is a point of pride in not using an AK-47 like any guy on the street, using an American-made weapon instead. But there's definitely a big difference between the two. AK-47s are ubiquitous in that part of the world. They are definitely considered less accurate than American-made weapons, but they're very powerful. They're almost indestructible, and they need very, very little maintenance.
It's a little more difficult because you do have to take care of them, but take care of them. You don't have anything to worry about.
Yeah.
But obviously the popular choice here is an AK-47, which was pretty much developed around this area, so that one is better suited because you could pretty much never clean it and it'll always fire.
Wow. If you had the choice of an AK-47 or an M4 for what you do here, which would you have?
Probably an AK-47.
Yeah. What do you think?
I will have an M4.
You'd have an M4? How come?
Well, I've been dealing with M4s for longer since I joined the Army, 16 years now, so I'm so used to it.
Do you have a romantic attachment to the M4?
Usually M4s are more accurate than AK-47.
Yeah.
They do have a bigger round, bigger bullet.
Two American soldiers there with two different perspectives. One said he'd prefer an AK, one said he'd prefer the weapon he has. Rifle politics. Russian knockoff weapons like AK-47s or NATO weapons, M16s, M4s. Your rifle politics depend on your personal taste, your training, your goals. But your rifle politics are also a matter of politics and politics' best friend, which of course is money. Afghanistan has an economy of something like $14 billion a year. $14 billion. The training budget for Afghan security forces last year was roughly $9 billion. This year, roughly $10 billion. Next year, roughly $11 billion. So average it out to $10 billion a year training up the security forces. $10 billion a year in a country with an overall economy of $14 billion a year. Those training budgets are reported for us by NBC's Richard Engel. They've never before been reported in the U.S. media, so there's your scoop. There's your scoop, but here's your question. When you build a $10 billion a year institution in a $14 billion a year country, what does that do to that country? We are building an Afghanistan in which the dominant institution in that whole country, by a mile, is the military. If the West funds the military there to a tune of $10 billion a year, that just completely dwarfs any other institution in the country. There's no way that institution will end up being constrained by any civilian authority. And maybe that's not the worst thing in the world, but it is sort of inadvertently what we're aiming at. Even if the U.S. combat mission in Afghanistan ended today, no one I talked to from any country, none of the Afghan officers, none of the NATO officers, no U.S. officers, thought we would stop building up that Afghan military anytime soon. How's the pay?
Pay's good, comparatively, yes. Yeah. And that, of course, is, if I'm honest, is probably another attractor.
Yeah, certainly. Speaking with Afghan officers earlier, they're very clear that that's a very important part of making this, making the Afghan National Army grow. Of course, it raises the question of whether or not this force size is sustainable for a government with a GDP this small.
Yeah, well, that is an issue, but I think NATO, the United States, may be footing that particular bill for some time to come.
In terms of the American public thinking about America's role here, and our role as part of this coalition that is here, obviously this is a NATO training mission, do you think that what's happening now is sustainable in an Afghan-only environment? After the coalition leaves, will Afghanistan itself be able to sustain this kind of training that they need for a police force this big?
Well, that's exactly what we're trying to do, is build the foundation to be able to train leaders. We really are focusing right now on leader development. We're investing in literacy for the young police who come through, as well as the Army soldiers, recognizing that that is the cornerstone to building the foundation here. If we can get them to read and write, not only are they better police and Army soldiers, that they are better citizens, and then they can can take that gift and pass that on. It's going to take time for them to be able to sustain this, and we believe they can. Now, fiscal sustainability is another issue, and how are they going to be able to afford this? And the answer for that is that the coalition is going to be here, Shona Bashona, shoulder to shoulder, for a while.
Shona Bashona, shoulder to shoulder. We are building an Afghanistan, if all goes well, in which the military is the dominant institution in the country, supported even if we leave to the tune of 10 billion Western dollars a year, which, remember, we've now ensured they will be spending on American-made weapons. Your tax dollars at work, America.